So hi everyone, welcome to the first webinar in our performance series. So today we're going to be looking at recruitment and resourcing, how we can hire for fit and when we might not want to do that. A little bit of housekeeping to begin with. As usual, if you can pop your questions in the Q&A or the chat boxes, then I'll be keeping an eye on them throughout the webinar today and asking the guys any questions, and we'll get as many as possible answered. So first of all, an introduction for those of you who don't know us to MyPeople. We're the experts in measuring psychological factors that can affect team performance. And we take the guesswork out of teams and enable confidence and fairness in people decision making by allowing you to unlock trust in your business. So my name's Wendy Kilgannon. I'm the sales manager here at MyPeople, and I'm delighted to be joined today by my sidekick, Christian Hughes. Christian's the CEO of MyPeople and a psychologist, and also former professional rugby player Will Fraser.
Oh.
So I'm going to hand over to you straight away, Christian, and let you get cracking with today's topic.
Good to see you back. So this series that we're running now is about performance improvement using information that we're already capturing in an organisation. So at every point in the employee journey, there are opportunities to increase team performance using data. In our time at GB Cycling, from the moment a young rider came out of the Young Rider programme, there was information that was captured on them through their journey in the organisation that was then fed back into the Young Rider programme to try and improve selection and recruitment of young riders. That information was also used for improving training plans and performance delivery. But always there was this cycle of gathering information and then feeding it back into the variety of points at in the employee journey. In England, rugby is another example. There's a database on their players that holds masses of data on player well-being, on training methods at club level, on nutrition. And all of that is then fed into the onboarding process for new players and for bringing players out of their clubs and into the England training environment. In business, we capture huge amounts of data in the recruitment phase especially. And then when a new starter begins in an organisation, we have performance management approaches. But we don't tend to join these two pieces of information together to optimise future recruitment. So what we might want to know is which type of personalities have worked well that we've hired recently, which types of people have fitted well to a specific team, who got up to speed quickest and why, and where did successful performers come from, which recruitment channels, which organisations were they working at before that might be similar or dissimilar to our organisation, but that created performance in our organisation. This information and the use of data that's collected in each stage of the employee journey is what this webinar series is all about. So we're looking to discuss, sorry, I'll just grab my notes. We're looking to discuss how we can continually refine and optimize not only the processes of performance, but also how we use this information to optimize team dynamics. So in this webinar series, we're going to look at three big areas of data capture where data can be used to improve performance. One is recruitment. So it's good to examine what we capture, what we are missing, and what we can do with the data, which is what our focus will be today. In our next webinar, we're going to look at training plans. And the goal in sport over the last 10 years has to get to ever more personalised plans of development for each individual. And although in business we often talk about PDPs, personal development plans, a PDP that is customised by role, by personality, by what worked for others is definitely possible with data, but we don't tend to do that so much. We tend to give generic performance development plans. And then the final part of the series will be around goal alignment. So this is slightly linked to performance management, and we've seen cascading goals. But what about using data to provide insight on what type of goals are being completed, by what type of person? By profiling completion rates, by gathering information in this phase, we can gain huge insight into goal achievement so that we can improve our goal setting and make it more likely that we're going to achieve goals in the organisation. So we know from our experience in sport, huge performance leaps can be achieved by using data to improve performance, and we hope to share some of those ideas and approaches in this series. So just to introduce a concept here, this is by Jim Collins, or James Collins, Jim as he's known to me. He talks about Good to Great as the author of Good to Great, the book Good to Great. and talks about when recruiting the right people, companies that have been very successful tend to place greater weight on character attributes than on specific educational backgrounds or practical skills. So that's going to be a large part of the focus of this webinar. And we're going to start off talking about hiring for skill or for fit. Just as a quick recap on our previous webinar series where we were talking about the factors that influence team performance most, we talked a lot about trust, team trust, and we looked at relationships, and so the influence that the quality of relationships in a group has on performance. We looked at the behaviours and values of a team and how well demonstrated they are within the team, and that influence on performance. And then the alignment of focus and shared purpose and that influence on performance. And all of those together gave an indication as to the level of trust in a team, and trust was the biggest factor in influencing performance in both our research in the past and in what we were presenting in the webinar. How do we bring these factors into the hiring process? When we know they're so important for performance delivery, are we using them in our recruitment approach? So there's been some talk recently in sort of recruitment circles about moving beyond hiring for only skills and capability to also hire for culture fit or culture addition. But the problem that we tend to run into with the idea of culture is it's a kind of wide concept, and it tends to be at an organisational level, so it can be a bit ill-defined. It's much easier to talk about team fit because we all understand what a team is. We've all been in a team, and so we can grasp that concept that someone could fit a team or not fit a team. So let's look a little bit at what we tend to do now. At the moment, the emphasis in most recruitment in business is hiring for skill and capability. Perhaps educational background is sort of heavily weighted as well. We tend to focus on the individual rather than the team. We don't tend to use the data we hold on a team to inform our choice of individual for that team, which when you think about it is quite crazy. If you're putting somebody into a team, you want to know whether they're going to work well with their teammates. And we don't tend to track the success of our new hires well enough that in a way that we could use that information to feed it back into the recruitment process. So should we be giving more emphasis to hiring for fit rather than hiring just for skill? So why would you hire for fit? Well, on top of the top two factors in performance delivery or prediction of performance in a business are capability, so having the skills or cognitive ability to do the job. If you don't assess for that in the hiring process, there's a greater chance that you're going to hire an individual who's less likely to perform. Equally, if someone does not connect with their colleagues, who struggles to fit into the team or doesn't feel motivated or inspired by their teammates, they are also less likely to perform. Yet we tend to put a lot of emphasis on the first one, on skills, and very little emphasis on the other. So I'd just like to bring in Will at this point and just perhaps invite you, Will, just to say a bit about the difference between skills and fit and attributes within Saracens.
Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I mean, when I was playing for Saracens, we went through a big shift in this area way back in 2009, whereas kind of pre-2009, the recruitment was done almost exclusively on skill or talent or whatever kind of word you want to give it. And it didn't get us very far. And we had this big change in 2009 where actually everything was shifted towards attributes, towards behaviour, towards attitudes and values, and everything Christian's spoken about so far. And what we actually found through that shift is you build on all the things Christian's already spoken about. So if you're bringing people in, like-minded people into an organisation who share similar or the same values, who behave in a similar or the same way, the levels of trust increase, the level of cohesion increases, the commonalities, the shared purpose increases, and off the back of that, what you get is a much tighter group of people who then go and perform better. We often spoke at the club about the fact that actually the job was the easy bit. So the skill was the easy bit of the job. You know, in rugby and sport, by definition, the whole reason you have coaches is to coach you to be more skillful, to be better at the job itself. In business, if you reach a certain level in the business, the majority of your role is actually developing your team, developing your people, upskilling them with the skills they need. That's almost the easier bit. The difficult bit is actually getting like-minded people, is getting the values, the commonalities. And if you can do that through your recruitment process, then actually you mitigate against a lot of future problems that would occur if you go down the skill talent route.
And as somebody who's worked in a lot of teams that support rugby players, whether it's England rugby or other athletes in other areas, we always felt the rugby players were that part of playing the rugby was the easiest part. The analysis and knowing what to do was
yeah, depends who you talk to.
Oh dear. So, what are the consequences of skill-only hiring? At the moment, this is the typical recruitment approach. So there's increases in the likelihood of subcultures. And what I mean by that is, we're going to talk a bit about diversity later. So I want to just distinguish between diversity and subcultures. It's very easy with skill-only hiring or functional hiring, as we would call it in sport, to get to a position where you have people who are good at their jobs, but who are individuals that focus on what they're doing. In individual sport, that's more tolerated. In team sports, it can be diversive in a negative sense, in that you get a lot of people looking out for themselves, and you get subcultures where ones and twos of people gravitate together, and you don't get this sense of a unified culture and a unified collective. So that's one of the main risks of skill and functional hiring. Equally, you get imbalances in team makeup, where, especially in England, where we're bad at speaking up and having conflict, you can get teams operating where there is a lot of dislike of each other in the teams, but no one ever says anything. And that underlying conflict exists and erodes trust and erodes performance. You can also get, all of this sort of leads to team misfits and ultimately to attrition. So that level of churn that can occur in business is likely to go up if we only consider skills in the hiring process. So what does hiring for fit look like? For those of you who have been on a few of our webinars, you'll know that we normally insert a Simon Sinek quote somewhere around here. But just to shock you, we haven't. However, we are going to refer to a couple of pieces of his work in this. First and foremost, it's about thinking team rather than individual. In Western civilization, at the risk of sounding slightly grandiose, we have inbuilt into our system that we think in individual terms, whereas we really need to look at some of the ways that Eastern companies operate, and there is much more emphasis on team, especially in the hiring process. Within that, we're now sort of talking about skill and attributes. So what is an attribute? An attribute is a quality or a characteristic of an individual, whether it's something innate or something they've developed over time, like adaptability or patience. It tends to come with experience, and it can be applied to multiple situations, which is very important, and we'll come to that in a bit. It's often that in times of uncertainty or when things don't go to plan, that attributes come to the fore, that you see people's qualities come to the fore. Those are the moments where you can't just execute a skill. And quite often, if I take rugby as an example, and Will can perhaps give some context to this, most rugby teams perform skill drills. And that is the repetition of a task over and over again until it becomes almost memory. What is harder to practice, though, is how you use that skill, or when you use that skill. I know Eddie Jones likes to try and create, Eddie Jones of England Rugby likes to create a range of skill drills and then a range of decision-making drills where you're thrown into scenarios where you have to make situational judgments and you have to determine what you should do next, creating an element of chaos to try and drive out those attribute qualities that we're talking about. Because when things become unpredictable and uncertain, it's not possible just to execute a skill. You're looking at judgment and bringing your natural qualities to the surface to deal with the situation. So perhaps I can just link back in with Will on that sort of attributes versus skill element, and you could just expand on the Black Monday, as you called it, and what the ramifications of that has been for Saracens.
So going back to 2009, as I spoke about earlier, the kind of the vehicle that we had this big shift in how we recruited from, exclusively on skill to almost exclusively on attributes and attitude. We had this day that's become known as Black Monday. So a guy called Brendan Venter took over the club as director of rugby, and he had this whole philosophy which is built off his GP practice. So he was a doctor back in Stellenbosch, where actually it didn't matter how good or bad you were at rugby. What mattered is your attitude and your attributes, and then they can build the skill on top. So Black Monday was a day where he released 14 players from our team on one day. So, you know, a huge cull within the squad. And his reason for doing so had nothing to do with how good or bad they were at rugby. You know, some of the players he got rid of were ex-internationals, current internationals, some of the best players we had in our team. The reason he got rid of them was entirely to their attitude. And the fact that they weren't prepared to rock up every day and do everything they could to make themselves better, to make the team better. They didn't share the values that he wanted as part of this club. And conversely, the people he then brought in to replace these guys were the opposite. They weren't necessarily the best rugby players in the world, but they had all the right attributes to add to the team and the culture and the environment that he wanted to create. And the culmination of all that is the success we've had as a club in the last 10 years up to January 2020. You know, that is all a culmination of getting the recruitment right at that early stage, but then actually evolving it and following it through for 10 years afterwards. Because it's all well and good hiring for fit, you know, initially, but you've got to keep doing it and you've got to keep reevaluating. And the only way you know if you're hiring for fit is by actually taking a look back and reflecting on who you are as a business. What is the team? What are the behaviours? What are the values? What do you want them to be? And then hiring off the back of that.
And I suppose the sort of coming on to team fit in a second, the obvious question is, well, how can I assess somebody for attributes? Well, there's two main tools, either personality trait tools or situational judgment tools. Situational judgment tools tend to be used more for competency frameworks, trying to assess someone from a competency perspective, but it's not very hard to transition that into assessing for attributes. And where it gets really cool is when you assess an individual against the proposed team they're going to join. So if you imagine going through a recruitment process and you have in your mind the team that an individual is going to join, imagine now if you have some data to support that process rather than it being just intuitive and based on gut feel. When you have data on your existing team, whether that's personality data or some of the behavioural and value data we've talked about in our previous series, and then you have data on an applicant for a job, and you can really see whether that individual is going to fit into that team or not, or where the areas of conflict might be. Then you can get some really cool outcomes with team fit and attributes. As we'll come on to later, you can also expand beyond just personality data and behaviours. You can look at focus and cohesion scores that we've talked about in our previous webinar series. And if you don't have that data already, we can help you. So Will, I think you're...
Yeah, so obviously, you know, what we've spoken about so far, Christian's spoken about so far is hiring for fit. So understanding your employees, your team, who they are, what their attributes are, and then hiring for people that you want to then fit in to that mold. As you can see from this slide, what happens when you're actually trying to change that team, when you're trying to change the culture, the environment, the direction that team's going? What you actually need to do then is hire against the attributes that the current team have. You're trying to look for someone different to the current situation because you're trying to either shape the team up and make it more diverse, change the habits, or you're trying to be like, maybe in sport, you look to the top and see what they're doing and see where you can imitate and make it your own. And that's where actually arguably it's almost more important to understand who your team are, because the only way you can hire the right person to change tack is by actually knowing who your team are at the moment and then going out and looking for something different. And I think it's something that you see a lot in sport, particularly when you see an older player who suddenly gets signed by an up-and-coming club. A lot of the time that's because that up-and-coming club want to use their experience, the teams they played for, draw on that to then help mould their team to become better, to fight up in the leagues. And I think it's a really interesting one in business because so much focus is put on recruitment. And I think everything Christian's spoken about so far, actually there's not a lot to no emphasis on this. I think a lot of time in business we look to recruit for all the wrong reasons, and when we look to recruit to change team culture, we don't necessarily know what our own culture is in the first place. So when we bring someone in who we think is going to take us in the right direction, what inevitably happens is actually nothing changes because we don't know what we're recruiting against in the first place.
Absolutely.
Before we move on, guys, the first questions come in. I think this is from a Liverpool fan who says, Liverpool sold Coutinho. How did they decide that their best player should be sold, do you think? He's playing in the Champions League final this Sunday.
Talk about the intervening 1.5 years where he's done nothing. Also a Liverpool fan. Yeah, I suspect there's be a range of data that supports that. I happen to know some of the data analysts at Liverpool, and I do know that they had made a desire. There was a real desire to change the way they played, and look at creating multiple ways of scoring goals broadly. One of the problems when Phil Coutinho was there was that he was one of the dominant creators in the team. So there were some tactical reasons. I don't know enough about the sort of personality and attribute-based side of things within Liverpool, so I can't speak to that. But yeah, that's something that probably Will could say a word or two on, because I couldn't imagine many businesses, to perhaps put this in context, I've certainly worked in many businesses and worked as a consultant in many businesses whereby their highest performer is also one of their worst behaved individuals in their business. And the idea of a business getting rid of a high performer because of behaviour isn't that common. And yet in sport, what Will was talking about on Black Monday, some of their best players went in that process. Perhaps just on that, Will, was there a moment of fear for the rest of the team left behind that we've just eradicated our best players, just got rid of our best players?
100%. Yeah. You know, and it creates a lot of confusion and doubt with the people that are left behind, because, well, it depends. If it's not fully explained and it's not communicated properly, then yeah, there's a lot of confusion. But, you know, the reality is with anything like that, you have to look back retrospectively. And at the time, we thought Brendan was a madman. You know, he was literally getting rid of ex-All Blacks and guys that got 60 caps for England and all this kind of stuff, and bringing in players that had never played international rugby. And so the two just don't compute. But as I said, the way Brendan positioned it and the way he ran it was that actually he backed himself and the coaches to upskill the players enough to play the way they wanted us to play. But actually having that foundation of just inherently good people was where we had to start from. And you can't really teach that. And what I'll say in response to the question, like Christian, I don't know Mr. Coutinho at all. What I will say is Liverpool won the league after he left. So we can kind of, you know, you can balance the two out. But I think it's, for me personally, you know, you can hire the most talented person in the world within your given industry. But quite frankly, excuse the language, if he or she is a dickhead, they're going to cause more problems than they're going to solve. And that's just a fact of life. And it's how you then want to run your team. If you're happy to run your team with conflict and arguments, but you have a couple of people who perform well, then potentially that's the route to go. But if you want to run a cohesive team that get on and as a team perform better, then recruiting on attribute is more often than not the only way you can really go about it.
This might be a bit of a leading question, but do you think, reflecting on your Black Monday experience, do you think that taking those best performers out of the team encouraged people who perhaps hadn't been performing at their best, not necessarily coasting, but were not performing to the best of their ability? Do you think it encouraged them to step up and fill that vacuum, or do you think?
I think what it does is it levels the playing field. So Brendan came in and essentially said, no one, you know, amongst Black Monday, there's a lot of other stuff that we did as a club in terms of establishing our values and who we wanted to be and actually what we were accountable for. And actually what we were accountable for was all the non-skill stuff. What we were accountable for is actually how we behaved with each other on the pitch in training, away from the club, how hard we worked, and how willing we were to actually learn the knowledge and the detail we needed to. The actual physical skill element, that we weren't accountable for that, because in Brendan's mind, that was the coach's job to give us that. But all the other stuff was where what we were accountable for. So as a player, yeah, it levels the playing field entirely, because you know, as long as I'm giving this, then I'm in the mix. I'm going to be in with a shout of playing or get selected or whatever it might be. So I think you're right, it definitely does. And what it does as well is that in leveling the playing field, by default, everyone buys in so much more to what you're doing. because everyone's at that same level. Everyone's getting the same level of respect from the coaches, from the hierarchy. There's no kind of old school apprenticeships for the young kids, or everyone has a decent crack at the whip. And I think that's what, hiring off attribute, again, that's one of the other benefits you get from it.
I think it's probably time for my super chicken story. For those who know me well, you will have heard me talk about super chickens many times, but there was an academic study, I haven't made this up, where there was a batch of chickens that were laying eggs, and a number of those chickens, let's say 4 or 5, were considered super chickens. They were laying double the amount of eggs of the rest of the group. And so as part of an experiment, they were separated from the rest of the group and put together in a super chickens team, a Real Madrid Galacticos of chickens. I'm getting too many Galacticos and supers together in one sentence. And the experimenters wanted to see what happened. Did the team that were the sort of super chickens produce more eggs and get better through competition? Or what happened to the other group that didn't have the super chickens in there? Did they just wither and die? And what they actually found was the opposite. The super chickens began to compete and peck each other and attack each other's eggs, and laid less eggs overall than they were laying as part of the group. And the other group, which didn't have the super chickens, started laying more eggs. And so it balanced out. And I think, whilst there's many interpretations that could be applied to that, the one I'm going to use here is that it is very possible that you can have 1 or 2 high performers whose very presence is stopping the rest of the team perform. And maybe I should have used that as the example for Philip Coutinho. That would have been a better one, but I didn't think quick enough.
Think quicker next time.
So, this is all very well talking about fit and attribute, but how do you do it? Well, we call this 360 hiring. Very simply, you need data on your current team. You need to build a questionnaire or interview approach that assesses applicants against that team profile using attributes and behaviours. You need to then score those applicants against the team in terms of fit, and you need to be clear whether you require a fit or not. So some of the data that you might want to include in that process of building a profile: personality data, behaviour and values data, team cohesion data for things like social capital, motivation, psychological safety, alignment of purpose and focus. I know that's a very specific type of data capture that not many companies do, but we can help with that. So some of these areas you may already be capturing data on, some may be completely new to you. Either way, we can help and provide data on an existing team. Usually it takes about 3 minutes per person on the data capture, and then about the same again for an applicant. So it's a quick process. So what is that? Let's just recap on what the principles are there. Then you're hiring for desirable team attributes. So you need to survey the applicant for this and give equal weight to this as to skills and capability. And not for 1 second, and the message in this webinar is not, don't assess anybody for skills or capability, because you'd have absolute chaos. Equally, if you're not assessing for attributes, you're functionally hiring only. So you can identify some of these attributes by personality trait surveying or situational judgment surveying. And then you want to model this against the team that this person is likely to join. Or alternatively against key relationships that this person would need to be able to execute well with in order to do their job well. So when we talk about modelling and team fit, why should you listen or trust Will or I or any of our team on what we're saying here? Well, we've spent the last 20 years on team modelling and researching in elite sport and in business what are the critical factors that, most importantly, you can measure, but secondarily, that underpin team delivery and performance. So this is recapping slightly from our last webinar, but the fundamental is trust. So I'm just going to quite quickly talk through these for 30 seconds each. So for those who were on our previous webinar, you remember all these, but just to give you a recap, team behaviours. So this is about how well demonstrated are your company values and behaviours in your team. Why is it important? Because how people behave to each other in teams dictates how sustainable performance is in an organisation. Team alignment. How aligned are your teams in purpose and focus? Why is it important? Because teams perform better when they are aligned around a shared purpose and direction. And team cohesion. How strong are the relationships in your teams? Why is it important? Because people invest more if they have strong relationships with their teammates. And when all three are combined, you get a trust, or a trust score in our platform approach. And why is trust important? Because high trust is required to deliver high performance. So if you add someone to a team, you want to feel confident that they will not damage the high trust in a team, and hopefully that they will contribute to that team trust. So recruiting for team fit and attributes enables you to make that assessment.
So how can we help? You won't be surprised to learn that we can absolutely help.
No.
So, I know, it's a shocker, isn't it? So we offer a platform that merges employee data where you already have it and enables you to generate the additional people data so that you can measure the ROI of training spend. You can get early indications of team problems before they cause any performance issues. You can profile your high performers that enable you to generate more of them, replicate more of them. You can build strong teams based on strong relationships and shared purpose. You can link engagement and performance together in order to enable you to see patterns in performance and improve your organisation's culture to improve team performance, and most importantly, improve that trust score, which will improve performance and affect the bottom line in a positive way. Don't affect it in a negative way, that would be bad. So we can help you for free. We're offering companies a free team personality survey to get them started. It's up to 500 employees, and it'll help you better understand your existing teams in order to help you make better decisions. So as part of that, you'll learn about groupings of personality traits within your teams. We use the Ocean framework, which is the most academically researched framework in personality traits. We look at things like openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, and stability. We can also look at things like stress risk and resilience tolerances. So from a mental health and well-being perspective, it can give you some indication on what the resilience levels are like within your organisation. It can also help with learning and working preferences, but also how certain employees behave in team situations. So for those of you who've seen our webinars before, you will know how it works. We'll send the team the MyPeople survey link via email, and we'll collect all their responses together, and we'll then provide you with a report of the personality types within your teams. By understanding your teams today, you'll know how and who you need to hire tomorrow. So contact us now. This is my email address. If you'd like to learn more or get started, then you can, to help you understand, you can contact us on wendy@mypeoplegroup.com. and we'll get you started with either the personality survey, if that's what you're looking to do, or we can help you with a bit more information.
But you don't need to stop there. You can get more involved in our platform, view employees in real time, improve the accuracy of your team fit process by seeing how new hires perform, and then craft data-driven succession plans for the future.
Before we get onto questions, which I appreciate if you could pop them in the Q&A or in the Zoom chat, our next webinar is on Thursday, the 24th of September at 2 p.m. and we'll be looking at personalised training. So we'll be continuing the performance theme, but this time looking at personalised training.
So that'll be all around PDPs and how you can use information to customise training plans and therefore make them actually workable.
So does anyone have any questions for the guys? Oh, you're going to like this one, Christian. Was the number of extra eggs laid by the less performing chickens, did it exceed the loss of eggs from the high performing chickens that were now fighting?
I'm just going to say yes. I believe so, but somebody will be able to dig out the academic research on Google and probably fact check me.
I imagine so. Okay, when hiring to change a team, would you recommend hiring someone with some complementary traits to ease the transition?
Can we go? Or?
Do you want to take that one, Will? Or?
Yeah, I think it's, to be honest, I think it becomes, the question's more how, why, and what do you want to change within the current team. If it's a really drastic change, then arguably obviously would help if there are similar traits, but if it's a hugely drastic change, then you probably need someone that's fairly different to the people you currently have. If it's more of a sense of, let's say, increased empathy or increased emotional intelligence, then actually a lot of the traits will be fairly similar. It will be the odd one here or there that actually you want different to enhance the current group. So I think the question is more, are you looking to kind of wholesale change the team, or are you looking to add to it and enhance it? And then that will determine actually what traits you want in a new person that are similar and what traits you want that are different.
Perfect. Is there a danger of hiring too many people with similar personality types?
Shall I take that? Yes. Yeah, we've got a wagon load of research of what parameters you want to be operating in terms of personality types. Perhaps one of the most intuitively understandable ones is around extroversion. So this is how social an individual is likely to be, how extroverted they're likely to be in certain situations. We've got a wagon load of data that shows having more extroverted people in teams helps up to a certain point. And after you get over that certain point, it drops off a cliff and productivity declines. And so in the research that we've gathered, we were asking, why is that? And it would be it's sort of intuitively easy to understand, because it's about people wanting to talk more and socialize more than they actually want to do their job. And then the data supports that. So yes is the simple answer. Hiring everybody the same isn't the route to go. And I'm sure we'll get plenty of questions about diversity and cognitive diversity. But equally, if you've got a very wildly diverse team, that's going to create more of a challenge around cohesion.
Next question. I think this one's for you, Christian. We currently collect some people data on our employees, but we don't know how best to use it to inform our hiring processes. How can we get started?
Yeah, great question. I think that's sort of step one of being able to build a profile of your existing team. And when I say profile, that perhaps makes it sound quite psychological and quite grandiose, but you're trying to put some evidence around what you think a team is like. We all can say, oh, this team's like that, or that individual's like this, but you need some sort of science or data that supports that view. Otherwise, it's just a biased interpretation. And the danger is we then take that bias into the hiring process, and we sometimes get it right and we sometimes don't. What this does when you're looking at attributes is start to build the likelihood of getting it right more often. So the starting point is probably give us a call and we'll talk to you about which specific data you've got and what would be helpful to add to that data. And then the sort of first step after that is building a profile of what that team looks like.
For a longer term 360 hiring strategy, which MyPeople product would you recommend?
Will, do you want to take that?
I'm just questioning who sent that question in.
Sounds like a ringer, right? Sorry, what was the question again?
For a longer term 360 hiring strategy, which MyPeople product would you recommend?
I would probably take the Total View product. That gives you the ability to combine performance data with teams data. And that then makes profiling very easy of teams, and you can track people over time and filter by different demographics and start to understand what is making a team work and what is just irrelevant.
Okay. This one's probably for both of you, I guess. Will, from a rugby perspective, how did you do this? How do you assess the candidate's soft skills?
Well, from a rugby point of view, it's probably very different to a business, in the sense that when you're playing professional sport, you basically live in each other's pockets for every day of the week for a long, long period of time. So the soft skills, because you spend so much time with each other, you can very quickly kind of determine whether someone's a bit blunt and a bit brash, or whether they have an element of sensitivity or empathy but I think that once you know that, you then know how you can be with that given person. So if you know someone's is quite blunt with their advice or whatever it might be, you know how to approach them. You know if they react in a certain way, it's not necessarily because they're being rude or aggressive. It's just how they naturally react to that situation. And on the other side, if someone's a bit more empathetic and is a bit more sensitive, then you're more likely to talk to them about certain issues and situations than you would the other person. So there was no, we didn't track it per se with the stuff we're talking about MyPeople, but that's purely because we didn't need to, because we were with each other literally 24/7. So you have that. And the difference with business is that you don't spend that same level of time with each other. So you'll never get, well, you will do, but it's taking a lot longer to get to that point where you know someone that well to know whether they're empathetic or not. So having the ability to use various tools to track it and to measure it, especially for a big organization, just allows that top level to deal with groups and teams in a much more effective way.
And just to add to that, I think context is very important. I can think of two individuals who played rugby for England under Clive Woodward, who, I mean, I didn't have any involvement in that group at that stage, but they were considered mavericks and disruptors to the group in England rugby. And yet on the Lions tour, their sort of humour, their black humour, was considered really galvanising. They were hilarious, and it was what was needed on a tour where you had to bring people together really quickly. And the only difference there was A, the management group, but B, the context. So, you know, a group that has to come together really quickly in the Lions. So having those sort of maverick characters who are show-offs basically was really helpful. It sort of brought everybody out of their shell, but it was considered disruptive in the England environment.
Cool. So just a last call for questions as well. Got one more here, but last call, and it's one you were expecting, Christian. Where does neuro or cognitive diversity fit into hiring in this way?
It doesn't. Who cares about it? Oh no, sorry. Yes, this is the most common question we get around cognitive diversity and neurodiversity. So diversity is obviously a very hot topic at the moment, and in terms of research, we've been sort of involved through the years with different research at MIT and Harvard. One of my most favourite pieces of research was around cognitive diversity in teams and performance, where certain teams were judged for how cognitively diverse they were, and then it was statistically linked to performance outputs. And in those studies, cognitive diversity in teams that were more cognitively diverse did perform better. But I think it's important to get underneath the surface of what cognitive diversity means, because the factors that were identified or have been identified in research are sort of twofold. One is around processing. So that's the extent to which an individual prefers to use their existing knowledge versus generating new knowledge when faced with an uncertain situation. So for me, that's back to attributes, so how someone will fare when a situation is completely uncertain. And then the second aspect was around perspective. So different cognitive diversity of cognition can affect different perspectives and bringing different perspectives into team. And I think we can all agree that different perspectives are important for the functioning of a team. If you've only got one voice, you're liable just to follow one path, and that can lead to trouble. That sort of perspective piece is around the extent to which an individual prefers to use their own expertise or rely on the expertise of others. So you can see that in leaders when you're talking about cognitive diversity, whether they believe it needs to be all through them or whether it's through the breadth of the team environment. So I think there's those two factors, I think, are some of the most important in research around what influences cognitive diversity in terms of the actual influencing points for performance. And there is no doubt that having more cognitively diverse teams is beneficial to performance, but it's a bit like the personality question, that if you go all out for cognitive diversity, what happens in those moments where decisions are taken and you need to follow a path? Are you going to get alignment around that path or not? And when we talk about extroversion, if you get really a huge bunch of extroverted characters in your team, is that eventually going to become disruptive? Same with cognitive diversity. If you go all out for cognitive diversity, are you going to get alignment of decision making when you need to actually make decisions? So that's about as far as I can go on the topic. I'm sure there are many more people better qualified than me to talk on it, but yes, cognitive diversity does influence performance. Yes, it's important, but it's also important to get underneath the bonnet and figure out what exactly is it that's making the difference in performance. Will, anything to add on that as I tread this dangerous area?
I think you covered it. You're all good.
Perfect. There are no more questions coming in. So this is your very last chance. If you've got a question for Will or Christian, pop it in the Q&A box or the chat box now. Otherwise, if you do want to contact us to either find out a little bit more information about the platform or indeed to take us up on the offer of the free personality survey, then my email address is wendy@mypeoplegroup.com. Drop me an email and we can get that organised for you. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you on the 24th of September.
Fantastic. Good to see you all again. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.